this here first, and then we're going to talk about details.
Yes.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Oh. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Bear with us today. It's a weird day because Aubrey, who's kind of our behind-the-scenes gal for, the back end of going live and what all that entails and the 3 different places we go live, she's on vacation. She left us.
She's really behind the scenes today.
So I feel the pressure to figure this out. And not to mention, we here in Ohio, where we're at in Ohio, we've been under what we call a tornado watch since like 8 a.m. this morning.
For the entire day.
Yeah. So luckily we have a basement here. So if we run and we're no longer on here, it's because the watch turned into a warning, which means there's actually a tornado.
That's right.
But it's weird because it's kind of gloomy, but looks just like a spring day outside.
Yeah, but it's kind of got this weird sun glow thing going on out there. So anyhow, just in case something strange happens and we take off, should we leave the camera on so they can watch what happens?
No, I think I'll take my phone with me.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So it's a weird morning, or a weird day. But hopefully the weather is better where you guys are at. I know if you're in Northwest Ohio or Northern Indiana, it's probably about the same as us. So it'll probably be a whole lot of nothing, but just thought we'd let you guys know if we run. Yeah. We're headed to the basement.
That's right.
Okay, so this is class 3 of our Quilt-In-The-Hoop 101 course. And oh goodness, we covered just the basics in week 1, which we talked really about battleizer, water-soluble thread, and wool, if I remember those correctly.
Sounds familiar. We've gotten that far anyway.
And then our second class, we kind of recapped those things, and then we talked about what we call our stitch and flip method, which is just kind of a piecing method that we use adapted from paper piecing. And I just read a comment and I totally lost my track.
Was it a good one?
She said we're funny, so
okay.
We feel stressed out, but
that's right. Don't let them see you sweat.
Yeah. So last week we talked about stitch and flip, and we did that little demo, and we worked through some weird technical things last week too.
Right. That's okay.
But hopefully we've got it figured out this week.
That's right. We're gonna have a fun week because it's I like the piecing part, but I also like what we're going to do today because it adds to what we've already built on.
Yes. So the block that we're going to stitch is our applique block. So it's right in the center right here. I like this block because it has the quilting, the beautiful quilting that's included, as well as the piecing with your stitch and flip. And then on top of that, we layer the applique.
It has it all.
Yes. It really does have it all, this block. So it's a fun one. It's a little more, I don't want to use the word advanced, but it definitely is building upon those techniques.
It's not really more advanced, it's just different, and it takes a little longer because there'll be some satin stitches around your applique.
Yes. Yeah. So I guess, let me grab my notes so I don't forget anything.
Imagine that.
Okay, so for applique, one of the things in your course guide that you'll find is that we talk about HoopSisters Mini. And will you talk about why we love that, and I'll go run around and grab it?
Okay. The reason we love our HoopSisters Mini is because it's got very thin blades to it. It's very tiny. It's offset, of course, so we can get it in the hoop. And I'm going to just grab one. Another nice thing about it is, the thin blades, but look how tiny that is. You can get in so nice and close on your applique, and you'll see us using this today in today's class.
Yeah, because like you said, a thin blade and a sharp point. So some of those tight corners that you actually do see in this applique, it's nice and easy to get in there. So definitely a great pair of scissors makes a big difference when you're doing this. And one of the trimming tips that I think is a really good tip is when I'm trimming, you probably do this too, and probably don't even think about it, because I didn't really think about it for the longest time.
I think there's a lot of things you do that we just do and we don't think about it.
Yeah, because you realize it works a little better for you. But I like to apply just a little bit of pressure by very gently pulling my fabric away from the tack down stitching. That works really well if you're using like a batik, but with an open weave fabric, be very careful.
Right. And anytime you're doing applique, whether it's HoopSisters or someone else's applique, we really recommend that. Well, we can't recommend what you do for someone else, but we can recommend for ours that pick a fabric that does not have an open weave, that is going to have a tighter weave to it, like a batik. It doesn't have to be a batik, but I know sometimes we've gotten some fabric we've tried to use for applique, and the weave's been a little open, and sometimes that can cause some problems.
I think of like I'm going to say a specific fabric, like
Okay.
grunge.
Right.
Grunge, a line of fabric.
Yeah.
It's not really a batik, but it's got a nice tight weave.
Right.
So when you're trimming for an applique, it doesn't shred.
Right.
It stays intact nicely.
Right. I think too that when I'm trimming, I try to keep the blade of my scissors flat.
Yeah.
And I think that helps you get in a little bit closer too. And another cool thing about our designs is that we have the tack down stitch for your applique fabric. It's a smaller stitch and it goes around twice.
Mm-hmm.
So that if you do happen to get just a little too close and clip one of those threads, there's another round of threads there that'll hopefully hold it all in place.
And so you were talking about the tack down. We typically use a water soluble thread. We've talked about water soluble thread every single week.
We have.
And it's because it's really important to get an awesome finish for your block. So we typically tack down our appliques with water soluble thread. Not all the time.
Right.
I'm actually working on a project where you're using a thread that's a little bit different because that same step adds some decorative stitching on top of it. But most of the time we tack down our appliques with water soluble thread. And there's a few reasons for that. And one of those reasons is if I'm doing an applique, not in this specific block, you don't see it, but sometimes we do appliques that might run into another block. So you want that water soluble thread to tack down because you want that to be where your seam allowance will be. You don't want to have like a dark green thread or something like that.
Or sometimes, like you can see the purple that's here stitched out on the orange. Sometimes we'll want you to match that thread with the fabric, in which case we'll tell you to use a matching thread instead of water soluble.
Yeah.
And then stitch around the perimeter and also some of the detail inside the applique.
Yeah. And then what else did I write down? I have to do this, otherwise I'll forget. I also like to use the water soluble thread, and we've talked about this in our previous classes, that it limits the thread changes that you're doing, because some blocks you might be tacking down multiple pieces of fabric for appliques, and I don't want to change my thread with every single applique.
I don't either, especially when you know it's going to be secured with other stitching after that. So we know what's going to come after that because we designed it. So sometimes we may tell you to use water soluble all the way through on several steps. Just do what we tell you, and you'll be all good to go.
Okay, let's see. I'm looking at comments really quick. Do you ever use heat and bond light to your applique pieces? Pat is wondering.
We do not on ours. Before we even had HoopSisters, I was very familiar with heat and bond light and would use that a lot. However, because a heat and bond light comes in handy if you're cutting out your applique shape perfect to where it's going to be appliqued first. But ours is a stitch in place. So on ours, you will see that your heat and bond light, you really can't apply it to the entire piece of fabric like we're going to show you.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is since we're using wool in some of our blocks, if you're not using wool, I suppose you could put a little bit of heat and bond light behind it to hold it in place, but there's really no need, so just save your money. But I forgot where I was going. There was a conclusion to that somewhere.
Did you see the weather update on the top of the screen?
No,
I don't know
I
what
did
it was.
not.
It popped up.
I'm going to ignore that.
I bet Nina will tell us.
All
She
right,
worked with us for the
We'll
basics.
hear sirens. You guys might hear sirens too.
Okay, there was another question I don't want to miss. Michelle was wondering why don't we just use a cutting machine to prep applique pieces?
You could use a cutting machine. We do not give you the cut files that go with our applique. I think it's a little more difficult to place it exactly where it goes. And by doing the technique of applique we're going to show you, which is just stitch in place and then trim, I think you'll see where you're going to get more of it's going to be more accurate and more perfect by doing it that way. Whereas if you use heat and bond light or you use a cutting machine and cut everything out in advance, you could possibly end up with something not being tacked down fully with your satin stitch.
Yeah.
Sometimes it becomes a little bit more problematic where this is 100% foolproof.
Yeah. Yep. All right, well, what we're going to do is we're going to jump right into
Okay.
a demo. So first, Annie, stay here.
Oh,
Because I wanted to show them this quick little, I just wanted to show
Okay.
this off to them a little bit. This is just
Cool.
one page from our course guide, and I'm going to have Annie kind of walk you through that while I get our demo set up.
okay, this will show you, this is kind of what we're going to be working on today. In the last week and the week before, like I said, today we're building on what we did from last week. So you can see the first picture is basically the same thing that we did last week. And the second picture is where we're going to take our applique fabric and we're going to line it over the placement stitch that we already have stitched out. And we will actually show you this in real time too. We're going to actually work on this. But this is where you put your applique fabric down. The machine does that tack down stitch, and then you use your HoopSisters mini to trim the fabric away. And then after that, in this design, it's going to do a quilting stitch after that, and then it's going to do the satin stitch. So we're just going to, and the reason we do that, we don't do the satin stitch right after, is because it does have a little area and the fleur-de-lis kind of like on the stem area where it's going to do some of that same stitching over that, but you'll see that as we go. So that's basically our applique technique, and you'll find this in your instructions from your course guide.
Annie's going to head over now to our machine. I'm going to see if I can switch our view over there. Oh, I'm going to turn this a little bit. And now Annie's going to walk you through a demo, and like she said, she's starting at where the photo that we just sent you. Oh, she needs scissors, she says.
I'm giving her sign language.
She's
like
starting
that.
a few steps in on this block.
I am. So you remember last week you did the stitch and flipped and you made your half square triangle, and then it did some quilting. This time it does the placement, and then you do your seam and flip it, and you've got your half square triangle. And then step after that is it did a placement stitch for where your applique fabric is going to be. So our applique fabric is this orange, and I'm just going to place it right over the top here. For some reason, I already have orange in the needle, and I'm just going to go with it. But I believe your instructions will tell you water-soluble thread. So here we go. We're just going to let the machine. And I'm just going to make sure that the fabric stays smooth while it's stitching. And it has another tack down area down here. Okay, so here is our completed tack down stitches. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take your HoopSisters mini and you're going to cut right up close to where those stitches are.
And you see how Annie's, it's her left hand without the scissors. She's kind of pulling a little bit, just applying some gentle pressure. And I think that makes for quite a bit of a cleaner cut if you can just apply a little bit of pressure on that fabric as you're cutting it.
That's a little tighter area here on the 5-inch.
Oh.
But I'm pulling the fabric, like she said, with this hand and then cutting with the scissors by leaving the blade kind of flat against your block.
I think it'll be okay if you can't get in that small area too.
It is small.
It's going to stitch over the top. So
normally I would probably take this hoop to a different flat surface, but we wanted you to be able to see what we're doing here. So it's a little bit awkward. So sorry if my arm gets in your way.
Don't you feel the pressure sometimes?
I do.
cut it, but don't cut into those stitches.
Right. But I like how the scissors, the nice sharp point to it, cuts right into those narrow areas. You got to spin it around. I hope I'm not making you like motion sickness.
Looking good.
I like the orange and teal combo.
We're going to throw another color in there in a second.
We
too,
are, and that's going to really
For
make
fun.
it pop too. Okay, so now the next step on the design is actually, we don't have a backing on here, so I'm going to switch this out to embroidery bottom thread. And then we're going to stitch purple thread as kind of the decorative area that you probably saw in the sample earlier.
So Deb asked if it would be easier with SVG and it's like a scan and cut or a Cricut. And Deb, you probably weren't here quite yet, but we just talked about using cutting file or like cutting machines. So we do not provide SVG files. And we were just talking about how we believe it's actually easier to do it this way so that you don't have to get something perfectly placed on your block. And trimming it's actually pretty easy. I would say this applique is pretty intricate too, as far as like cutting around everything. And it's still pretty simple.
Yeah, and you'd have to get all those little areas exactly lined up perfectly. But hey, if you have a scan and cut or any other type of cut machine, try it and see which way you like better. I'm going to just cut this thread tail.
Yeah, give it a try. We just don't provide those files or support any issues like that.
Pretty?
Pretty fun.
Pretty fancy.
I love the purple on there.
I do too. Okay, so now we're going to do the satin stitch for around the applique. So I'm going to put my orange thread in. Match our thread.
Catherine said, "Sounds like your machine might need a little oil." It's actually
I think it's the
platform that's around
right.
that's just bouncing off the table.
I know, we're like, something's vibrating. We got to figure it out. Make sure everything's in there correctly. We just moved here, what, about a week ago?
Yes.
So who knows? Hopefully everything's set up fine. I'm just going to let it do a few stitches. And I'm going to cut the jump thread.
And this satin stitch will take a couple minutes to stitch out. And I thought about switching over to the backing fabric and talking about that, but I want to make sure you guys can hear us, so we're going to sit tight and let this stitch out for a moment.
So if you have any questions, go ahead and post them.
Okay, we're gonna cheat and stop this so that you guys don't have to sit through 5 more minutes of that. Give me 1 second, and I'm going to change our camera around a little bit.
I'm sure every single one of them has seen this before.
Yeah.
On their own machine. So, but you get the idea. It'll do the satin stitch around the orange fleur-de-lis, and then after that, it'll do a little more purple here, right in this area. Well, they can't see me yet.
They cannot.
They cannot.
Hold on 1 second. Oh, did you do that or did I click? I don't know.
I think I didn't do it. If I did, it was completely by accident.
Oh, and they're really crooked.
It's okay.
Hopefully it's not now.
It's okay. So the only thing that was going to finish up was the orange satin stitch around the fleur-de-lis, and then it would stitch out the purple that you see here, like a purple band.
Yeah.
So, but all of you have seen all that happen before in your own machine, so we don't need to make you sit through all that. We want to get on to more important things. So,
okay, Wilma asked what needle we use for the applique part. Do we use the same needle as the other parts of the block?
yes, I just keep the same needle in there.
Okay. And then Wilma was also asking about using fake leather or other things like that, or suede and applique in our designs. Wilma, I would give it a try and see if it works well for you.
Yeah.
The satin stitches are thick enough that maybe it will. I would give it a try. It probably depends exactly on how thick it is.
How much? Yeah.
We've done things with cork and craft text before in the past. I don't know that we've done satin stitching on those
And
things,
we've used like a little bit of fleece in some of our areas with a satin stitch, so I'd give it a try.
But if you do that and you're having issues with it,
Stop.
I would recommend to try that same design or block with just like a cotton piece of fabric or something like that, and it would probably turn out a little bit better. But yeah, okay. What is next?
I think you are going to talk next about
backing. Yes. Okay. I am going to. Okay.
So on the backing, there's a couple different ways you can back it. I'll let you get all your stuff set up and I'll talk. But there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can add your backing bolts in the hoop of your machine, and then you match your bobbin threads when you do that, and that way the back looks nice and pretty as well. I think we may have talked a little bit about that yesterday or last week with the quilting and stuff like that. So you can add it while it's in the hoop, or you can add a one-piece backing on a smaller project like the one behind us, and then just add one piece and then stitch in the ditch, do your binding, and be done. Advantages of the one-piece backing are that you don't have to add sashing.
So it's a little bit quicker.
It's a little quicker. The advantages of putting the back on while it's in the hoop is that you can see the beautiful quilting come through to the back.
And I guess one thing I'll say about that, because I always tend to add it while it's in the hoop, it's kind of like a habitual thing now to do that. And what I wish I were better at is realizing when I have a backing fabric that has a lot of print, so like with this one, a lot, it's striped. It's harder to see the quilting that comes through on the back. So if you're using a backing fabric with a lot of print or a backing fabric that's really dark and your threads may not show through, that's where I would probably recommend going with a one-piece backing or backing your larger quilts in sections. So here is one of the examples though of if you are, the camera's like back, so I'm going like this. I'm trying to, here's an example of if you are adding your backing fabric while your blocks are in the hoop. So these blocks I've trimmed up, which we're going to cover next week, and I joined them together. And again, we'll also cover that next week. And this is kind of what it would look like, and then you'd add your sashing to it. Obviously, I would join this in a larger section before I add sashing. I wouldn't join 2 blocks and then add sashing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that next week too. But you can kind of see maybe a little bit that thread on the back. But again, that's kind of what I was talking about with using a really busy backing. And then our next option would just be to back in a larger section. With something this size, I would join all of these and back these in one go. With something like Navigator, which is our new heirloom quilt for this year. It's a shop exclusive. I would definitely join that in sections. And then
add one, like the Navigator is probably 8 sections this size, so you can join this section, then join the one next to it, the one next to it, and then sew them together and sash it. Hopefully we're not confusing that. Well, or just put the backing on while it's in the hoop, and that way it's all done.
With something this size, you don't need to add any sashing to it if you're backing it in one section as you go. If you are working with one of our larger quilts, you're going to want to back it in sections, and you still will need to add a little bit of sashing. It just won't be over every single seam. So again, this is the example of I've not added my backing fabric to the back of my hoop. And what you would do in this instance is, I can't really switch my camera, can I?
No, you cannot.
I have a piece of fabric that's cut. It has about 1 inch on all sides. And I would just lay my fabric flat. And if you're working with a large enough section, you can tape it to make sure it's not moving. And then you'll lay your basically the top of your quilt, your pieced blocks, your joined blocks together. You lay it over the top of that. So my backing fabric is right side down on a table, and then my blocks are right side up. And then I would just pin these 2 layers together, avoiding the seams. And then, like Annie said earlier, you just put this in your machine with your blocks facing right side up. And then I like to use monopoly. So a monofilament invisible thread in the needle and in the bobbin. If you don't want to use it in the bobbin, you could use a thread that matches your backing fabric, and just use what we call an elongated serpentine stitch to kind of stitch in the ditch.
And what I like about using a serpentine stitch to stitch in the ditch instead of a straight stitch is that it helps your blocks lay nice and flat.
Yes.
So if you try doing just a stitch in the ditch with a straight stitch and you find that you've got like
Yes,
it's
like
just
little
not
waves,
laying
kind of,
flat, then try it with a serpentine stitch. And the weather's kicking up out there.
I know, I keep looking at it. And look, Aubrey is finally joining us.
On her vacation.
Hi, Aubrey. So let me look at my notes.
Okay.
I wanted to go over this and just kind of touch on this again. We talked about this in the previous 2 classes because in those classes in our demo, we added the backing fabric to our block while it was in the hoop. So I always think when I'm doing that, there are 3 things to remember. One of those, the first one I would say is to match your bobbin thread to the thread in the needle. So those have to match if you've added your backing fabric. And then next you want to turn off your automatic thread cutter and bring your bobbin thread to the top of your block. And those 2 things will help you avoid what we call nesting on the back of your block. Do you want to tell them what nesting is?
Nesting is just when, as the machine begins to stitch, it'll do like a locking stitch. And sometimes when it first starts, you'll end up with a lot of little ugly threads on the back of it. So by doing the 3 things that Sarah suggested, it really does avoid those. It makes for a nice, cleaner looking back. Yeah. So definitely 3 points to remember. And the 3 points were match your bobbin thread, turn off your automatic thread cutter, and then what was the third one?
Bring
Pull
your
bobbin thread to the top. We need an acronym for that.
I know. Well, you can just get the course guides. And
That's
it's all in the course guides.
That's true. And it's also in our instructions. We try to remind you every single time in our instructions.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. So like I said, that is all in the course guides. So if you have purchased Quilt-In-The-Hoop 101 and you're going, how am I going to remember that? Just check your course guide and it'll all be in there as well as in your instructions for pretty much everything. So I think we covered everything else in my notes. Sandra over on YouTube did ask, what do you mean sashing? Where do you put that? So join us next week, Sandra, because I hate to do this to you, but join us next week because we're going to talk extensively about sashing. It's a little more difficult to see on that one.
Yep, show her this.
Yes, thank you. But sashing is basically what we would use. So I've got my 2 blocks joined together. This is the front of my blocks, and then this is the back. Now I still have these raw edges right here, and I need to cover those. So that's what we would cover with sashing. And sashing can kind of be a decorative element to your quilt as well if you're using kind of a contrasting color, I'd say.
Right. We have several of our quilts that we have used contrasting. She's going to see if she can find one. This particular one behind us, we use the same thread, so you really cannot see the sashing. It blends in. But if you want to have some fun with the back, go ahead and get something contrasting for your sashing and make it a little bit more fun. It just makes the back a little bit more interesting by doing that. Did you find one?
I did. Of course, it's on a bar, but I'm bringing it out.
Of course, just bring the whole bar out. Oh my goodness. She is bringing the whole bar out.
So this is an example of a quilt that...
Want to hang it up?
Sure. Thank you. Where are we going? There. Okay.
I can't go any higher.
This is actually last year's mystery quilt. And this is just an example of, I think this sashing looks a little bit more decorative because it's got the contrasting background, backing fabric and sashing fabric. So.
And I love how you can see the quilting threads that came through here. And you can also tell that she brought her bobbin thread to the top, turned off her automatic thread cutter, and matched her bobbin thread to her needle thread.
And hopefully this is showing on camera okay, but this is a fabric. This is more of a solid, reads as a solid, perfect kind of fabric to add your backing as you go because you can really see the beautiful stitching that's coming through. Okay. Well, let us know if you guys have any more comments. I'm going to take this down so we can see this design. And I think that about sums up this week. Next week is probably one of our most important classes, and it's the kind of class that we probably get most questions on,
I think you're
right?
Yep.
So next week we are going to, if I can get it. Next week we're going to demo trimming, and we'll use our trimmer by George to do that. And we're also going to join some blocks together, and we'll talk about the best way to pin your blocks together. We will talk about backing again, just kind of recap what we talked about, and then we will demo sashing.
Yeah.
So lots of demos.
Yeah.
And then I believe somebody, when we first launched this course, somebody asked if we would cover, do like a tutorial and cover adding a sleeve to the back of your wall hangings and adding a binding to your projects and your quilts. And I did do that. That'll be on our YouTube channel. I believe it's this Friday. Aubrey's watching and she'll yell at me if I'm wrong. That'll be on our YouTube channel this Friday on our Sew with Sarah episode. So it'll be a little tutorial.
Are you going to confess your mistake on Friday night?
Sure, we could. Well, I think I do it in the video, but it was kind of funny because I did this tutorial, and when you do a tutorial, you're supposed to do it correctly, right? Well, I added the sleeve onto my wall hanging. It was a directional wall hanging. It was Hello Spring. So it's directional. There's a top and a bottom, and I added the sleeve to the bottom. And then I hung it up, and it was upside down.
Upside down. That was pretty funny.
But that's okay. That's an easy thing to fix. But it was funny.
But I
We
bet
did
the
get a kick out of it.
tutorial on how to add the sleeve was fabulous.
Yeah, the tutorial hopefully works really well, and it's
Right.
easy for you guys to
Just
follow.
keep in mind that she's sewing that on the bottom of her wall hanging.
I think I admit it, but Linda says she's done it before too.
Yeah,
And Linda's a pro,
It's
so
easy to do.
so it's not just me.
Especially when you add a one-piece backing, because sometimes you can't tell really what's top and bottom.
Yeah.
It's just the fabric on there.
Yeah.
So is there anything else we're going to cover?
Next week? No, just that's still a lot of stuff.
It is a lot of stuff.
Trimming and joining
Yep.
and backing again and sashing. So Sandra is asking what the other side of that sample looks like. I think she's talking about this. Sandra, this is our mystery quilt from last year. Do you want to turn it around real quick, or am I going to knock something down?
Sure. Well, I don't know about the real quick. Take your
Okay.
time. I'm in the line of fire here. Whoa.
I'll just hold it up real quick. So.
This is last year's mystery quilt, and so we might be talking a little bit more about mystery quilt here in the near future. So, and it's a lot of fun. We tell you exactly how to buy your fabric and how much, and it's not scary at all.
Okay, Patricia said she's done much worse than hang the sleeve on. I mean, I have too, but
Right.
that's just my mistake that I'll fess up to on a live.
Right. Hey, we have to confess our mistakes or before someone else points it out. But, putting the hanging sleeve on the bottom, that was kind of obvious.
Yes, and luckily it's an easy fix.
Yes.
So, yeah. All right, well, any last questions before we sign off for the day?
Let me check Facebook and make sure.
I think we pretty much answered them all, unless I missed some. Scrolling back through. All right, well, I think we have them all, so thank you guys so much for joining us again. Week 3, that's a wrap on week 3, and next week, next week's going to be a big week. Yes, next week is the final week, and
so get your popcorn ready.
yes, that's going to be a big week. Lots
Notebook,
of information.
take notes. Yep, there's going to be a lot of information
Yes.
coming your way.
All right,
So,
bye guys. We'll see you next time.
okay, bye.